without a short delay. I'm Joanne Tomsky. I'm the manager of the Parks Exhibition Center for the Idyllwild Summer Program. And tonight's gallery opening is really exciting. I think you'll find we are including art by many of our summer workshop faculty in a wide variety of media tonight. But first, we have two guest artists speaking to us and showing us their work in the gallery. I just want to tell you logistically, before we get started, after we finish up, this is the drill that many of you have heard me say every week. Please take your chairs out. We set them outside to the left of the door. We close up the gallery for 5 minutes or so that we can reset things, pedestals, get rid of lecterns and stuff. And then we open the doors back up for the opening at 8. So, with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Laura Waite's art focuses on words as image, including the creation of one-of-a-kind artist books, encaustic painting, and monoprints. She teaches book art workshops throughout the country, and her class this week at Idyllwild Arts is manuscript books, writing as image, exposed sewing. Her artist books are in private and public collections worldwide, including the Library of Congress, and her work has been featured in many publications, including a Master's of Book Arts and the cover of 500 handmade books. So let's welcome Laura Waite.
Thank you. I was here 3 years ago, and I'm really glad to be back again. And one of the things I really like about Idyllwild is all the kids playing music. My son's a musician, and he's in college now, and I kind of miss drumming and guitar and kids coming over to play, so it's really nice to be around that energy, and then to see these kids running around with all their instruments. Can you have the first slide, please? I studied bookbinding in England, and I have a degree in art history, and I didn't really know. I always wanted to be an artist, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with it, except that I wanted to make things. And so when I went to England and I took a one-year course in printmaking, that all of a sudden I went, blind. You know, that's really exciting. And so I spent 4 years after the printmaking learning traditional methods and leatherworking and tooling and restoration work and all kinds of stuff. And then I finished there in 1981. And so this book is the first book, I think, that it's really the beginning of the words and image series. And I did this in 2004, I think it was 2004. And it has a series of monoprints inside the book that are all having to do with crosses and religious symbols and triangles. I've always been interested in symbolism, and so this leather is, the red is actually leather inlays. And then on the bottom, the yellow is real traditional gold leaf. I haven't really done a book quite like that since. Can I have the next slide, please? And that's some of the inside. And in our class, we're doing a lot of things that are similar to this. I did a lot of layering of images, and I did writing with pens. It's the first book I really did pens with, using the texture. I selected a number of words like lion, ox, and eagle, so that from the 4, and then there's the 4 evangelists, there's 4 corners, there's 4, it runs all throughout all kinds of religions. And then I repeated the words over and over and over again. Next, please. And then there's a detail of it. And it's pretty traditional, kind of simple writing. Since then, I've become a little more fluid with it. And it has, let's see, it's mostly monoprints. And on the right there, I had to do that backwards. So, because it was done on a plexiglass on an etching press. So whatever you do is not what you think you're getting. It's the reverse image. So there's some misspellings and things in this word, in this book. I decided not to work with it. Next, please. And then I thought, well, I really like the shape of X. And I started started investigating what it was and what it meant, and I looked into the idea of or words that started with X. And they were really interesting words. There's not that many of them. And there's things like Xbox. It has to do with danger, and it's unknown, and sex, and things that people don't want to necessarily talk about. And there's all these things, unknown variable, planet X, and I like the shape of it. It's got a lot of energy. It's also about change. And so I did this book using a leather cover again, and the covers in both these books are really trying to express something from inside the book. I like to have something where it's a continuum. Next, please. And those are some of the pages inside. I had used pages from a book I did before this that I had left over, and I had so many of them that I was able to do this series of 7 using covering up imagery. And so I started out with these printed pages that had been printed with wood type, and then covered some of it with, like on the left, with white. Left letters that I liked, put paste painting on it, put layers of stencils using paste painting. Next, please. And that shows some of the stencils that I used. On the left, you can see that they're mylar stencils, and you use them to paint with paste. And then you can see on the right where the image how it shows. And then lower down, those are chronograph plates, basically made with stuff you find at Hobby Lobby. Things like stick-on foam and string and card. And then I printed those over it. So there's lots and lots of layering of X words, of images. And I would work on each page until basically I liked it. And then I had this big stack. And so then I arranged it and came up with 7 books. Next, please. It has some detail of some of the pages. I had a key page in this book. Most of my work is abstract that I like to have some page or something going throughout the book that is kind of an organizing factor or gives people a key. And so this page in the red had all of the words I found that I used. Afterwards, I found more. But at that point, I had that small selection. Next, please. Then I did a book on labyrinths and spirals. This is another printmaking book. I've done, obviously, a lot of printmaking, although in the last few books that I've done a lot more handwriting, and that's what we're doing here. And so this book had, I think, also 7. Maybe I didn't, no, I did 9, I'm sorry. And so it's a fairly traditional binding. It's got a leather spine, and see how it's stamped with, on the leather there's some patterns, and that was actually leather that I ran through on a woodcut I had done previously. So it's basically embossed leather by running it through the press. And then the pages are paste painted. Next, please. Now I work, that's a studio picture where you see the drying rack with all the pages. They layer up, and I try to, none of the books I do are identical. There's a series, and there'll be a page maybe in the middle, or like the one on the right, that are similar. And so that'll, in this case, they all maybe went in a 5th position. There'll be, say, 7 folds. And then that way there's some consistency between the books. And I used collagraphs, I used solar plate etchings, I used a lot of painting. There's not too much actual writing in this book. Next, please. Then you can see some of the pages. It's got some I use woodcuts as stamps, and I use a lot of erasers as stamps. And spirals, S's, and so forth. Next, please. And then I started doing, after this, a little bit more work with writing, and I did some series of work on chess. And for the same reason I did X, because for some reason a lot of my work over paintings for, say, maybe 10 years, checkers checkerboards kept showing up. And I thought, well, okay, what's a checkerboard? A checkerboard is also a chessboard. And there's a lot of interesting history, there's a lot of interesting symbolism that goes with chess. The pawns, for instance, there's a specific pawn to each place. And they go like the queen has one of them is, I can't remember mine. There's a farmer pawn, there's a soldier pawn, the money lender's in front of the king, of course, because he always needs money. And so on. And so that morphed into words, using words more, because I came up with a lot of chess terminology, like the names of pieces, like knight is a knave, and then rook is a castle, and elephant, and all sorts of stuff like that. And then I also came up with terminology of how to play the game. So I started making lists. And that's always how I sort of work. Content is lists, it's not prose. So these are actually acoustics. And I do a lot of layering of paper. Like on the right, the lettering on that is actually on a Japanese kozo paper, which you probably don't, it's rice paper. But I write on it with sumi ink, and then I layer it in the encaustic, and it's thin enough, but transparent enough that you still see the color and you can do multiple layers. Next, please. And then I tried to make encaustics into books. Well, that's really hard, because encaustic it can't move it, first of all, because it flakes. So those pages are paper, and they look great, but then they didn't travel very well. They'd go to an exhibit, they'd be fine, and then they'd send them back, and they just fall apart. And the reason was there was acrylic underneath. I used to use a lot more acrylic in my work, and then by the movement, there was just enough movement that the encaustic flaked off, and it just destroyed. But this book hangs on rails. It ends up, it's maybe 3 feet wide, and you can kind of walk along it. Next, please. Then I did these books, which had, they're done on wooden panels. And this was a little bit more successful. And I think I'm kind of getting ready to do some more that are kind of like this, but I would like to do it with a little less metal. They're made on a plywood that I like to use. It's aircraft plywood. It's about an 1/8-inch thick. And I use it for a lot of different books for the covers, because it doesn't warp. You can do all sorts of stuff to it. And I wrapped them with a Japanese paper with the image on it, and then I put encaustic on it. And then the metal, there's all those pieces of metal stuck on there. That's to keep the pages from touching. Because if they touch them, they get a little hot and they'll stick. So that book exhibits on its, can be exhibited on the hand and can be opened with the book. Next, please. That just shows some of the details, some of the wrapping of the copper that I do, and then some of the writing. We're talking today about Japanese paper, what I call crowded writing, and you get that nice texture. So that book's really not very big. It's only 10 inches tall. And then those brass things were stuff I found in an old garage sale for an old office store. So they're real old brass paper clips. Next, please. And this is a studio shot showing kind of how I work. I tag a lot of stuff up on the walls, and I was doing a chess, one of those rail books there on the table, and then some chess encaustics on the top. And then with encaustic, a lot of times there's something, because the way I work on paper, you have extra pieces you might not like, and so you can peel them off, and that's what a lot of those things are. You might tap them up on the wall and use them later. And it changes the whole character of the paper. Next, please. And there's some details of that. Then, I make lots and lots of raw material. I use Japanese paper to write on it in all different forms. And I have a series of words. I kind of know what I'm doing, but I don't worry about where each piece is going to go. And then I start making something with it. Next, please. And this is this is a development from the chess series where I started just using the writing, just using the words, so it's kind of in a struggle because it's all these anxious words like struggle and, barricade, and words that have to do with struggle and war. Next. And it has it has some printing in it. No, it doesn't have printing. It has, on the left, that checkerboard is actually a piece of Japanese paper that was printed. It was made in the paper made that way. And so then I colored it. And it's got some writing on that's really big. I use these 4-inch brushes. So I'll use a really big piece of paper and then use the big words and then divide them up and they become a page. And the covers of those are, next, is there another one of those? Next, please. No, there is, but the cover is also that same plywood. And then I cover it with paper, and then I put about 4 or 5 layers of acrylic varnish on it and hardens it. And that way it will survive wear and tear, and you can get it wet, and nothing will happen to it. A lot of things I used to do more of, like on the right, is I use a paste painter, where I'll put the paste with acrylic and then right through it with one of those sticks you've been using. And so that gets a really, if you get the paste thick enough, and you can do it, we can talk about that tomorrow, but you can do it a little bit with thick paint. Next please. I did one more chess book, and I made 5 of these, and I just barely finished them last year. It took me several years to finish them. I made a series of stamps that had pieces. I made the right that's metal, that's copper for the pieces. And there was an exhibit in the 20s that called Imagery of Chess that they invited artists of the time like Man Ray Duchamp to design chess sets. And they recreated that exhibit. And some of these are taken from sort of after Man Ray's set, like that spiral. That's the knight, so a horse has a tail. Next please. Now I use Sun Tzu, the Chinese say he invented chess, but it's not true. It was actually a lot older, because he was writing around 400 AD. That it came probably from India about like 2,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago. And so, but the writing, a lot of it has to do with, I use it because it has to do with modern business. There's a lot of people who use the art of war, and chess is war. And there's all these patterns. So that's why I have a series of words that I took from Sun Tzu, like irresistible, adaptable, and that's always on this front page. That's like the key to the book. And then the rest of this, stamps and writing, I used, if you look at a book where there's notation of chess, it'll say K takes B or moves it here, and so I wrote that out in a lot of places as texture. Next please. And then this was done at the overlapping at the same time. A lot of encaustic paintings using that same method with the Japanese painting. And so I tend to work in series always. I'll start with 4 or 10 panels. I don't like to put everything I'm doing in one place and then decide which panels go together. And so the title of these has to do with pieces, a shard is a piece, and all kinds of other piece words, and thetas are one of Greek letters. And so it just relates to words and images of words. And that's really what I'm still doing right now. Next please. There's a bigger one. I tend to work across layers, and lots of layers. It's all Japanese paper layered with encaustic. The color is encaustic with pigment in it. Next please. And then this is a book made with the covers of Shape, and it's a sort of continuation of I use the papers I used for the classics, But the boards are all shaped. The idea is it's kind of like an altarpiece, and there's 5 of them. They're all a bit different. And that I use wood siding and cedar siding. And so it was really great because I used to do a lot more wood books, and it has a really thick, it's thicker on one side than the other, so if you use the thick part of the spine, you have enough thickness to put your cord through and have it be really strong looking. But then at the front, you have a thin edge, and it makes it look really elegant. And then I wrap it with paper and put layers of varnish and color and so forth on it. Next, please. So there's no printmaking in this. It's basically watercolor, gouache. There's still some acrylic in this book. And, writing with acrylic ink, writing with sumi primarily. And writing with a lot of the tools that we're using. Next, please. Then, about 2 years ago, I thought, I need to work big. I'd like to work bigger. I don't want to use a plastic. I'd like to do something that's a little freer. So I thought, what if I work in canvas? And I treat it like a piece of paper. So that's a piece of canvas. That table is 48 inches on its short side. And I just had big pieces of canvas and started using them the same way we're doing our paper. And I also laminated pieces of Japanese paper mucoso on them, starting out using rose water soluble things and then kind of working up to using layers of acrylic. And afterwards I stretched it. Next, please. Okay, I'm almost done. I'll go fast. Then that's some layers of color, and then that's the finished piece. Next, there's the finished piece. And so I liked it because I could trim off little bits and pieces at the edge, and you can also wrap the edge around the canvas. Anyway, next. And then that's another one I did, a little bigger, using really bright colors. And so the idea with scriptorium was, what the monks had scriptoriums, and they used to make these books called versals for singing songs, and they were really big. And so that's sort of where this idea came. These are really big writings, as if you were, you could sing to them. Next, please. And then I mentioned monoprints. I did a series of monoprints last year with a printer on Steamboat using the same ideas. The black square or rectangle and the left rectangle are both solar plate talios. And then a lot of monoprinting done with watercolor transfers that's done on mudware. Next, please. And that's a really big one I did last year using I had a whole series of encaustics that I didn't quite like. So I redid them and then ended up with these bigger paintings. So I use a lot of little paintings to make a bigger painting. So this is when I started using color in the ink on the Japanese paper. Next slide, please. And then that's a little encaustic, using a lot of color but not much paper. I write through it. I use oil sticks. I use pencil and encaustic. Not really carve it. I write with a hot tool, and it sort of scribes it. And I put oil stick, the one with the wax in it. Some of you have used on it, like in the writing, in the wood. Right? Next, please. And then that one is a little bit more writing. I did a whole series of these. I had a show about a year and a half ago, and I have maybe 10 of these. They all sold. It was like unheard of. So then I made a bunch more, and I still have them. I mean, it's just what happens. Next one, please. And that's what I'm doing now. I did these real recently. For some reason, I started out more gray, maybe because of the sumi, and I just wanted something a little more elegant. And so those are encaustic. But I did bring a bunch of the papers, some of you have seen, that came from the series, and I'm still working with them. So that's pretty current. And they're mostly watercolors and gouache underneath, not as much of caustic color. Next, please. And that's the same idea, a little bit different size. These were also remakes. Sometimes what's underneath. It shows through in weird places, but makes it more interesting. Like on the left-hand side, upper left-hand corner, that's some old stuff that I wouldn't have thought to put there, but I really like it there. Next, please. Hey. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Laura. So we're going to have a quick little changeover here. Our next speaker tonight is Rebecca Campbell. Rebecca's workshop this week at Idyllwild Arts is narrative figurative painting, exploring the object and the idea. She has exhibited nationally and internationally at venues including Gagosian Gallery, LA Louvre Gallery, oh boy, okay, what she said, mouthful. The Hammer Museum, the Phoenix Art Museum, the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. Her work is regularly presented in art fairs, including Art Basel Miami Beach, ADAA The Art Show, and has been featured in publications, including Art News, Los Angeles Times, Art Papers, Extra, Art Magazine, and the Huffington Post. So let's welcome Rebecca Campbell.
I'm over here, and you have to forgive me for two things. First of all, if you can't hear me, I think I'm loud, so I'm going to rely on that. The second thing, I'm a little bit clunky on the technology. So I'm back here because we're a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to kind of feel how long it takes me, and I'm going to get through as many images as I can with my limited ability on the computer. But the first thing I usually do is tell you a little bit about me, because I'm one of those artists who the line between my life and my art doesn't really exist. I came to art kind of out of a little bit of desperation. My background is I grew up in a very conservative community. I come from a family of 7 kids, 6 girls, 1 boy. It was the kind of community the girls were not encouraged to get college educations. But an interesting thing happened. I'll cut the story short, which is the 70s happened to my mother. And she allowed me freedoms that a lot of my other siblings were not allowed, including being able to read anything I wanted and pursue my love of art, for which I owe her everything. But the interesting thing was I go out and pursue art, and I have this different fate than the rest of the people in my family. I go to art school, and I produce my thesis show, and my thesis show had in it, at the time, my age, the age I was when I graduated from my undergraduate, all of my siblings had been married, and all of my sisters had already had children. And I was getting a piece of paper and a whole bunch of questions. Very intangible thing to get, as opposed to a husband and a bunch of babies. So I thought, well, I'm gonna make a show about that and what it means to get art instead of to get answers. So my BFA thesis was an installation. Oh, I should look at this on the screen. Make this bigger. And I didn't do a PowerPoint, sorry. So it was an installation, and the best place to see it, well, I'll just open these all. What's that? Never mind.
If you double click it, Rebecca, I think
I just got it, right?
Okay.
Oh.
Yay.
There we go. So this is, I don't show you this work to show you really great work, but I think it's important to see, to know sort of where I came from. So I threw myself a wedding, and I called this show On the Threshold, and I made a wedding dress, and this wedding dress was made out of eggshells, thousands and thousands and thousands of eggshells. And if you see here's another image of the dress itself. It was lit from the inside. You can kind of tell that this was before I had professional photography. Okay. So you can see on the detail here that the buttons were each made out of 2 cross straight pins, a dime, and an aspirin. The dimes were all liberty side up. And the edging here was made out of hundreds and hundreds of Marlboro Light 100. So the dress in the front had these birds that are flying around tethered with little golden rings around their neck. And there was also a painting in the show. Oh, behind, you can see, kind of, not in that one, in this installation shot, you can see a bureau behind, and the bureau was covered with poems, and that phone on the bureau, if you picked it up, was my voice reading the poems. And the poems were all about the experience of losing the certainty of a sort of, the rest of my family enjoyed, and getting instead a very big, full, creative, terrifying life. Above the bureau was this painting, and it's about 6.5 feet wide, and it was a triple-headed self-portrait, is what I call it. And my dad came to see this show, and it was very interesting and hard for him, because unlike my mother, he was still in the same place he had been most of his life, and it was hard for him to see me take a different path. He came, he saw the show, he disappeared for an hour, and he came back and he supported me. So that was a very important thing. So I show you that to show you where I started. That was my BFA thesis. Let me look at the time because I know it's passing quickly. What happened here? I go backwards to the other stuff. Okay. Then I went in my BFA, the Pacific Northwest College of Art was very focused on objects. And in my graduate school career, I went to UCLA, which is very focused on ideas. And I started to think a lot about opposites. And it seemed to me that they were unduly pitted against each other. That things like the brain and the body should actually both be able to be in a work of art. That things like realism and abstraction should both be able to reside in a work of art. That beauty and terror should all be able to be in a great work of art. So I'm going to skip now to, I'll just run through these ones very quick. This was the first professional show I had outside of graduate school. And it was an all-painting show. And in general, my inspiration comes sort of through a wandering path of the original idea usually comes from something in my personal past that's important to me, that then gets obscured or built on by cultural references, art history references, pop culture references, but it never looks like the original experience that happened to me. So these are, this particular show was called Thin Skin, and I went back to Utah and took all the photographs for the references. This painting is about 14 feet wide. The Cadillac was just bigger than my dad's Cadillac. This painting again is like 9 foot by 14 feet. It's called Discipline. And it's both an ode to my father and an ode to Mondrian, who is another kind of dictatorial person in the art world who I love and struggle with. This is another 9-foot painting called P19. Again, I was interested in opposites. I was interested in making a painting in which the woman was very powerful in a way that was completely unconventional. So here you have a 9-foot tall man and a tiny little whisper of a woman, and yet she's able to hold the whole painting with literally her little finger. This painting, this tells you a little bit about my process. I wanted to make a painting about my father had had a heart attack. And it was the first time in my life in which I saw that he was truly fragile, just like I was. And so I wanted to make an image about male fragility, but I didn't want to make an image of a man with a heart attack. So I mushed together a lot of memories, including one of a boy who I grew up with who almost drowned in the stream behind my house, but didn't. And then later at 16 died in his sleep for unknown reasons. So I put all of these together and came up with this, what I thought was a beautiful but haunting image of a child in the water, but you know he's not really necessarily supposed to be there because he doesn't have a swimsuit on, and you're not sure if he's going down or going up, and so I called this piece Hover. That piece is called Sugar Flowers. Again, that's kind of that. This piece, I think, shows the range formally that I'm interested in. Some of the work is very gestural. I do the work in Hover with the splashing and the big gestural work is done with an angled kitchen broom and a turkey baster. You see a painting like this, in which these little pebbles on the side in the asphalt around the pool took me like 3 weeks to paint. And it's very, very tight, and I think that I should be able to claim all that range for the painting. I'm not interested in being one kind of artist. I'm interested in finding the exact language that's right for this image. This painting is called Radiate, and forgive those people who are in my class who already heard this story, but it's kind of funny. When my dad saw this painting, he said, "That's a naked girl in my swimming pool." And I said, "You know, Dad, I know, and guess what's even funnier than that? You know the only time I can get a naked girl in your swimming pool? When you're at church." That's another 9-foot-tall painting. And this is the title piece for the show. It's called Thin Skin. All of these pieces were taken in or around my childhood home. And then this was a very big show that I did called Poltergeist. Let me see, there's lots, and just maybe all we can get through. I went back to the idea of mixed media work that I began with in that show that I did for my undergraduate thesis, only this was, I don't know, 15 years later or something like that. I felt like the art world often ignores or maligns the autobiographical and the personal in favor of the cool, the conceptual, the distant. And so I thought, well, what I have always done and has been important to me is to go through the personal story to find the bigger metaphor for the world. So I also had an idea that often things that are archetypically feminine get thrown out as being insignificant. If your work is categorized as being nostalgic or backward-looking or too soft, it often is considered unimportant. So I thought, well, maybe if I make it huge, it would be considered in a different light. Maybe if I use the terms of art history, maybe if I hit the note so loudly, we can have a different conversation. So I made a work, the whole body of work is based on my parents' home, literally. These are my parents' front doors. It was the middle of winter. This show opened, I think, in February, and my parents shipped their front doors to Los Angeles for me. Their actual front doors are surrounded by a brick facade, and I made these bricks. Each one is a palette knife painting. And I thought it was interesting, again, I wanted to include the opposites, and I was interested in the high and the low of the art world. As a set, these look almost like a movie set. Individually, they tend to, so that's the doors open. I'll get back to that. Individually, they look like high art. They are abstract, rarefied paintings that you can charge a lot of money for. Put together, they're pictures, they're cheap, they're throwaway. So I was interested in high and low art, personal and public, history and present. On my parents' actual door in the 70s, there were lots of ladies doing toll painting, and my mother was very interested in toll painting, and she did a beautiful sign that hangs above our door to this day that says the Campbell Home. And I instead did the title of the show in palette knife painting, mimicking her toll painting, and it was poltergeist because I thought poltergeist was a word that could hold many meanings. And a lot of people automatically think of the Steven Spielberg blockbuster movie. Some people think of the Germanic tradition of exorcising kitchen ghosts. It has many ways you can think about the word. It has an old meaning, a new meaning, and it will be reinvented again, I'm sure. And so I wanted to think about those multiple levels. When you walked in the door, this was the first sculpture that you would see. This is a real avocado tree harvested from a street near me that I saw while I was walking my dog. And it has been reinforced with steel and fiberglass, then covered with black velvet that was hand-tailored to every single, hand-sewn around every nub and every branch. Then across the crown of the tree is a flock of hand-blown glass birds that are filled with Windex, and the dish around the bottom is full of salt. And it's a special kind of salt called solar salt that's made by dredging the Great Salt Lake water and letting it evaporate, and you get this beautiful crystalline salt that looks like snow. And I came up with the idea of this piece because I was driving back to Utah, and I drove through a stand of burned trees, and they were just pitch black. And I thought, these trees have never been more beautiful. They were so stunning, and they were in a field of snow. And I thought, how touching and wonderful and horrible that they've never been more beautiful, and they've been burned. They are dead. They are gone. And I started to think of all of the things in our life that might represent. I was thinking of Sargent's Madame X, the beautiful painting of the woman in the black velvet gown and with cadaverously white skin, and how scandalous that was because she looked so beautiful and so vacant at the same time. And it was also an ode to my mother, who, as much freedom as she gave me, she still loves the idea of things being wrapped up in a nice little bow. She is not happy with how untidy the world is. And she realized once she couldn't answer all the questions in the world, she turned her focus to just cleaning the house. So the Windex is this idea that we love, the idea of something that's clean and neat and honest and true is beautiful. It's as beautiful as Windex, the brightest blue ever. But it's also toxic and unnatural, that things are complicated and dirty and messy, and that we just have to deal with that. That shows you how big it is. This was another sculpture called Satellite, and it's hard to see the details, but this is hundreds and hundreds of life-size copper bees. Each bee is the weight of a penny, and this the idea of this came from the state symbol of Utah is the bee. And I used to hate that so much because I thought, you have to be so sacrificing to be a bee. It's all about the hive, and it is not about the bee. And I thought that was the worst thing in the world. And then I had kids, beautiful, beautiful kids, and one of who is here today. And I started to learn that the hive is pretty amazing, and that things were more complicated than I knew they were, and that sometimes working for the greater good can be a beautiful, complicated, awesome way to do something big, bigger than yourself, bigger than the one, being bigger than a single bee. So that was this piece. You can see those little bees, and they're each on an individual piano wire. The birds of my childhood were the birds on the tree. The birds of my now live on these trees. These are my neighborhood trees now. I live in the middle of Los Angeles, and I see nature in new ways. I don't live at the edge of a mountain with a stream in my backyard. I live next to another bazillion people, and yet I still love nature every bit as much. And I track these birds in my neighborhood, and I think they are amazing. I'm also interested again in the crossing of realism and gesture, and how gesture can be both a formal device, but it can become content. Spattered white paint can be light, it can be butter, it can be frosting, it can be lifeblood, it can be many things, and to leave it out, for me to just make a photographically real painting is not interesting to me at all. This is a painting called Daddy-Daughter Date. It was about the experience of, which is a tradition that happened in my adolescence, in which you went on a date with your dad and you were taught how to hold a fork and be a conversationalist and dance properly and let the door be open for you. And when I was 16 years old, that was not what I was doing. And this is about the relationship between a father and a daughter, in which they both know it's extremely complicated, and neither one of them wants to really look each other in the eye. It's hard to be the daughter, it's hard to be the dad. This is based on my parents' the stairs in their house. That repeating shape that was at the front door is again here. I grew up with avocado green shag carpet. We're done, right? Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. Avocado green carpet. I wanted to make this reference to the childhood home, but I wanted to tie it into art history and minimalist painting and geometric minimalism. And so I worked with a kind of a couture rug maker, in which they dyed this rug, and each stair tread gets grayer and darker as they go down, which is the opposite of what those painters were doing, because they were making flat space, and I'm taking it and again trying to make it deep space by making it appear as if it's going down. The painting is Hansel and Gretel, or it's called Gretel, and it's about the forest, the dark forest. And that's my niece, actually. I often use family or friends as the people in the work. And again, you can see very clearly I like to pit the real against the abstract, the gestural, and how they live together and what they can symbolize. The nature as opposed to culture, impression as opposed to rationale, things like that. Also, I was interested in nostalgia. This picture in particular is called Highlander, and my studio was right by a bus station, or a bus stop, and there were these group of girls that used to gather at the bus station, and I had a metal grate door that I could see through, and they couldn't see through back at me. And these girls were they were like new wave Latina girls, urban, and the interesting thing was they looked exactly like I looked in 1988. And they were wearing hoodies and buttons and rubber bracelets and peg pants, and yet they had such a different experience than me. I was a white girl in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah, and having a very different experience. But here we had this very surfacey connection of fashion, and they were reliving in some ways my youth. And so I thought I wanted to make a painting of that by literally connecting them at the feet, by connecting these figures. And so I made them reflections of each other, and you can paint this painting in several ways. And this way it's like 16 feet tall, it can go this way, it can go this way, it can go that way, and it can go that way. So I'm just going to run through the rest of these images. There were other complicated paintings and sculptures in the show. This one again is about the first memory I have of abstraction, which involved running through a cornfield and being almost cut by the leaves of the cornfield, and yet it was an ecstatically beautiful experience. This painting is called Liebe Mutti, which means love mama. And I try not to cry when I talk about this piece, because it's about my mom letting me read any book I wanted. And that was a very difficult thing for her to do, and it changed my life, and I owe her everything for her bravery. So this is the oven that I grew up with, the double avocado grate oven, and it is full of books. And if you open them, they're cut sort of like a modernist grid painting. And these are all books that I read. And they are trash books, they're good books, there's Tolkien, there's Madame Bovary, there's everything in there because it all fit together to make my experience. And the symbol of the oven was one of both burning books, because in lots of cultures they're still interested in keeping information away from people, especially from women. And they are also interested, it's also a baking books. It's also about protecting and nurturing, which is what my mother was doing. Books. This is my love of music, which is a whole other story. My sister wanted to be a concert pianist, and I'm constantly making work about the piano and how important it is to me, the experience of music, how transcendent it is. And this piece is called The Romantivist, which is a combination of the romantic composers like Debussy and the constructivists who were Russian formalist artists who I adore. This painting, which I think might be the last one, is called The Wizard. And The Wizard was about, it's named after the scene in The Wizard of Oz when the wizard gets outed. When the curtain gets pulled and everybody realizes it's just a doddering old man behind the curtain. This is actually a particular room which anyone who went to the church that I went to would recognize. It seems very anonymous, but it's actually very specific. And I used to be very judgmental about the situation, and yet I realized as I started to think about it, my profession is curtains. That's what I do as an artist. I paint stories, I talk about parables and ideas, and it's all about how you use the curtain. They talk about it in psychotherapy, they talk about it in theater, they talk about it in all kinds of different contexts. And it can be a very powerful thing, used for good or bad. And it's actually neutral. It's all about who is manipulating the curtain. So that's what that painting is about, and I think that's all we have time for. So thanks for having me.
Yeah.